This is the final making things video for the captain's quarters. The only videos I have left to make after this is over the story, which will also include the final tour. And then I'm also going to do a vlog about my trip out to the museum to set it up and bring the Addams Family project home. I did promise you a new character in this video, and if I was a smart YouTuber, I would probably leave it to the end because that's probably like the highlight of this video. But I can't wait, I'm too excited. Let's get started on the new character. But first, let me say this. One of the things I love about science fiction is how much fun you can have with the different alien characters that come into the story. A lot of times they can have like an Earth type feature where it looks familiar to something on Earth, but is still very not human.
Enemy ships in Sector 47. It's a trap.
So I hope to have fun with that idea with this character. So without further ado, let's get started. The new character for this project is going to be a froglian. And yes, that is Earth language for a frog/alien. I don't know why this came into my head, but his design and his look has been stuck in my head for quite a while. I'm going to be creating the froglian completely from scratch, using some bamboo skewers and some pipe cleaners. I'm using the captain to try and figure out the correct scale, although because this is an alien, I do not have to stick to regular human scale, but I do want him to fit within the spaces and also be able to sit in chairs and interact. So he's going to stay around the same size as the captain. I'm using the combination of the pipe cleaners and the bamboo skewers because I want him to have long, gangly limbs, but I also want him to be able to pose slightly. So here's his basic frame. I'm going to add one more pipe cleaner towards the top, and this is just going to go into the clay area so I can start sculpting his head. I do want to bulk up his upper body, kind of like a football player type of shape, and so I'm using some t-shirt material and I'm going to wrap that around the pipe cleaners. The pipe cleaners are kind of like the skeleton that allow him to stand up, bend, and move, and the t-shirt material is going to be like the flesh, and I'm just going to build it up until I'm happy with his form. This is what I have so far. I just used some hot glue to glue it in place once I was happy with the shape. Now that the body's done, I can move on to sculpting the head. This was the part I was the most excited about. I haven't really sculpted a lot of animals, and making a humanoid type alien animal sounded really fun to me. I added some aluminum foil onto the pipe cleaner and then just molded it into the shape that I wanted. I'm using a ball stylus to poke into the aluminum foil. This is going to make room for the eyeballs I'm going to add later. I'm using paper clay again for this, just like I did for the figurehead in the last video. In fact, I sculpted them at the exact same time since I already had the paper clay out. And I was going back and forth between the froglian and the figurehead, and they were just very different scales and different projects. But it was fun to have a break from one to work on the other. I covered the aluminum foil with a very thin layer of paper clay and then used a ball stylus, the same one, to push in the area where the eye sockets need to be. Then I could add in some pre-dried paper clay into those areas. After the eyes were dry, I could add some eyelids. I'm hoping this is going to make him look a little bit more frog-like and less like a potato. Although potato aliens are good too.
Silence, girl.
I wanted to make sure he had a big frog mouth, so I'm adding some glue before I add a layer of paper clay on the front so I can start figuring out where his mouth is going to be and the shape of his big lip. I'm going to smooth the sides of the paper clay into his existing face to make it look like his mouth is connected to the rest of his head. To create the lip, I just pressed into the paper clay and pulled it down so they have just a little bit of a lip area, and hopefully once it's all painted it reads as a bottom lip and not just an upper lip. Once that was dry, I could sand it a little bit. I do want him to have pretty smooth skin. but then not too smooth because he is a frog, so I'm going to add a few little warts. Well, he's a froglian. I shouldn't call him a frog. He might not like that. He is a froglian. And so I'm going to add a few little warts with some paper clay by pushing it down into some tacky glue on the surface. I added 2 little dots in the paper clay and used a drill to drill out the holes. This was going to be a lot easier than trying to sculpt something so small. The feet turned out to be a lot more difficult than I thought. I tried making them with paper clay since that's what I was already working with. I tried really hard to figure out what I wanted them to be shaped like, but it just wasn't sticking very well to the bamboo skewer even though I had added some hot glue to it, and I ended up just smushing it and deciding to start over. And once again, cardboard comes to the rescue. I cut 2 little frog feet shapes out of cardboard and then decided to use a lot of hot glue to attach them to the barbecue skewers. I let that dry and suddenly I had 2 feet that were long and flat just like I wanted, but now I needed to figure out how to make them strong. So I'm going to use some wood glue, and I've never tried this technique before, but honestly it worked pretty well. I'm going to dip his entire leg into the wood glue and allow that to drip dry. I'm letting one leg drip completely off, and then I'm going to dip the other leg while trying to be careful I don't get the wet glue from the first leg all over the place. I do end up using a piece of mat board that I just kind of move around the desk underneath him until I get him situated into a jar of pins. And this was a great way to hold him in place while all of that glue dripped off and allowed everything to dry. I did about 3 coats of wood glue, and this was the result. It gave this yellowy finish, but it was very smooth and very, very strong. So I decided to do the same thing on his hands. I cut some mat board shapes for the hands, which I'm going to connect to the ends of the barbecue skewers that are his arms. I initially glued them on with tacky glue, and then I was able to take a pair of pliers and bend the mat board into more of a hand shape so it didn't look so flat. Then I did the exact same process that I did with the legs, where I dipped his hands into the wood glue and let that drip dry. It was a little bit harder to get balanced on my pin jar this time because of the weight distribution, but I did get it figured out, and this was the results. Very, very strong hands, but still very flat and lanky, just like I want. Now, in order to match his skin texture with the arms and legs, I'm going to do a light coat of wood glue over his face. This is also going to give it more of a frog skin texture and not so much of a papery clay texture, which can be a little bit gritty. So here is the result of sculpting my froglian. If you're wondering what his name is Bareth. And it's another thing that came into my head. I feel like it's a name that a frog would be able to say, kind of like a Bareth type of sound. So that is his name. He has a very important role in the story. I realized writing the story that I needed an outside character to come in so that the captain had someone to talk to, because the robots and Centauri, they already know everything about living in the captain's quarters. And so there needed to be an outside character. There is a bit of conflict between Bareth and the captain, which of course every story needs, but I do think in the end you'll enjoy his character and his part he plays in the story. I ended up painting him a classic green just to continue with the froglian theme, which actually goes with alien and frog very typically. And I'll be honest, I did struggle quite a bit with painting his features just because this is a new face that I've never painted before. But I did enjoy it. I had a lot of fun picking out the colors and trying to figure out how his eyes should look. I painted this along with some of my patrons who were able to join a live stream, and they had a lot of great suggestions, and we voted on whether he should have boots or not, and ultimately my patrons voted that he should have bare feet. Chalk pastel helped with his painting so much, and as you can see, I had quite a little celebration of opening my chalk pastel set. It made a huge mess. It was kind of a really pretty mess, so I was sad to clean it up. But if you see brown horrible smudges on my desk for the rest of the video, that's what happened. Because we're going with bare feet, I decided to put a little bit more detail into his feet besides just the flat cardboard. So I added some fabric paint, which is really good at keeping its shape. and this is going to give a bit more definition in the toes, and then I just painted over it with the same color paint I used on the rest of his body. I also gave a few little bumps where I'm going to be painting some fingernails, and I think this just gives it a lot more detail. And if you've ever been scared of making your own dolls because you don't want to mess with making hands and feet, I do think this shows that you can make them without clay. Even if you were to cut out a human-size hand and then cover it with wood glue, I think it would still work. Now I'm going to cover him with a matte clear spray just to make sure that I'm saving all of my chalk pastel work before I start moving into the clothing. Here is the result. I do like that he has a little bit of a satin sheen on him, but I do need to make his eyes nice and glossy because they are a fantastic feature of his face, and I want to make sure that they shine. For his clothes, I'm using a bit more of my Doctor Who t-shirt, which I think is perfect for him, and you'll see why coming up. But I'm going to make a jumpsuit. I actually really liked how his body looked, just with the wrappings that I did to build up his body shape. So I'm going to be using the same t-shirt material and making this jumpsuit from scratch. Now, I don't know why, but for some reason I would rather hand sew for an hour than take the 5 minutes it would take to get my sewing machine out to sew this. So I decided to try it on him first, and currently he looks like he's gonna go sing in a choir, but hopefully it will look like a jumpsuit by the time I'm done with it. I used some embroidery thread and a needle. I tried to get a thread that matched pretty closely to the jumpsuit color, and I just went around the sides, and I did this because another reason I didn't get my sewing machine out is I wasn't sure if I was going to be able to get this on his body without having to hand sew it onto him because it was going to be pretty close to the body shape. But thankfully I was able to sew up everything that I needed to first, although I did have to cut a slit in the back. But I was had my fingers crossed. I was like, please let these giant feet fit through the little pants, and they did. So I figured the rest of it should fit pretty well. So it is kind of tight fitting in some places, and then it's a little looser in the arms than I wanted, but everything fit on, so I'm just going to go with it. I first sewed up the back seam that I created so that it would stay closed. He's not going to have any changes of clothing, so this can be permanently attached. And then to fix how big the sleeves were and make it look more like the jumpsuit I have in mind, I did a gathering stitch around the area of the wrists and the ankles and then tied that in place so it was more form-fitting. I'm going to use some glue at the knots of those and then cut off the excess string so that I don't have string everywhere. And then I used a bit more of the same fabric and some hot glue to create a hem, and this is going to be glued around the edge of the arm so that I have a little cuff for the jumpsuit. I'm going to do this for both arms and both legs to finish off the look. I also decided to add a little waist piece. It really does blend in with his jumpsuit because it's all the same color, but I do think it gives him more of a division between his legs and his upper torso. I showed this to my sisters and they asked me why he was wearing a straitjacket, so we're gonna add a few more things to his outfit. I noticed that the back of this faux leather stuff I've been using for things here and there had an interesting texture, so I'm going to use that as a arm strap, I guess, and a belt. I'm going to glue that on with some hot glue, and then I realized he needed some kind of communicating device. This is going to go in with the story. JD had sent me all these greeblies a while ago, and I was excited to use another one for this piece I wanted to add. I straightened up the edges a little bit with a craft knife, and then I was able to paint it. I'm not trying to be too matchy-matchy with all his accessories, but I do want him to have a similar aesthetic to the rest of the project, but also match himself so he looks like he goes together with everything that is attached to him. So this was the final result, and I wanted to add one more thing. This was actually an idea from my patrons. They suggested a Doctor Who scarf, and I asked my sister, pretty, please, could you crochet me a scarf, and could you do it in just a few days? She totally delivered. I gave her the color palette and some ideas for some thread, and she made this beautiful long crocheted scarf. I love that it's so handmade, and I think that really kind of adds a softness to Barrett's character. I played around with a few different ways to wrap the scarf, and ultimately when I figured out the way I wanted it to look, I added a few daubs of tacky glue here and there so that the scarf would not fall off. I absolutely do not want to lose this in any way. And I just love the final attire. I think he's looking ready for some adventure at the bottom of the ocean or in the very cold sky. And for those Firefly fans out there, you'll be happy to know she made me one more thing. This was a total surprise. She made me Jane's hat. And she didn't know if it would fit on the Froglian. Unfortunately, it doesn't quite fit, but I do think we can still find a place for it in the project. You'll have to let me know what you think of the new character. What do you think of Barrett? He and Captain Maggie will have a very interesting first meeting in the story that's coming up very soon. I'm just so happy with how he came out overall, and it really just makes me want to make an entire frog person project so I can keep making frog dolls. He was just really fun to create. And of course, as I said, I found a place for Jane's hat. It's going to go underneath these stairs, and I just need to age it up a little bit so it fits in with everything else. Big thank you to my sister for those additions. I love telling stories with my miniatures, and one of the things that I've really so far only stated is that the captain makes all of the model ships. I really haven't shown that in my project. And so what I need to do now is make a project on the captain's desk. And if there's one thing I know how to do is to make a desk have a project all over it. This is the 17th century inspired desk that I made for the captain quite a while ago. I do actually have these in my store as a kit. It is closed until November 8th, but if you're ever interested in making something like this, it was a really fun desk to create. My first instinct was to create a craft mat like the one I'm working on my desk right now, but I realized that wasn't going to fit in with the time period I'm trying to bring around in this project. So I'm cutting a piece of faux leather. I think that's going to make much more sense as a way that the captain might protect her desk while she's working on things. These little pieces of wood were sent to me quite a while ago towards the beginning of the project, and I actually did make a ship out of one of these, so I figured they'd be the perfect piece to make it look as though the captain is halfway through making a ship. So I carved out the top, and then I made some drill holes with a hand drill so I could start adding some toothpicks, which will look like the captain starting to create the shape and the masts and everything needed for this piece. I also decided I want to build up the bottom of the boat, so I'm cutting out some pieces of wood that's going to be glued on. I usually like to use mat board in my builds more than wood. However, because this is going to be unpainted, I really did need to use all wood for this project. I wanted to add some other supplies that I thought the captain would need, like a spool of thread, so I'm wrapping some thread around a toothpick, and the thread was a little bit too straight, so I'm going to wrap it around another piece of wood and wet down the extra piece. I'm going to allow that to dry, so hopefully it gets a bit of curl in it. I think it's going to make it much more interesting looking. I'm also going to make the captain a craft knife. I don't know if they would have had these back in the 17th century. However, the captain is a time traveler, so she might have snuck in a craft knife just to make her work a little bit easier. So I'm just using a very small piece of paper cut in a triangle shape and gluing it on the end of a toothpick. The captain is also going to need some glue, so I'm going to be filling this glass jar with some yellow paint. This is going to stay wet paint for quite a while, but eventually hopefully it will dry out in the jar and I won't have to worry about it moving around. I put it into a small bag and cut the corner so I could hopefully pipe it into the jar without making too much of a mess. It somewhat worked, but eventually I got it all in there and was able to glue the lid shut. I don't know if the cork will allow it to dry out, but I hope so. I added some cardstock to the back of this faux leather, and now I can start adding all of my project on top of it. This is going to make it much easier to set up once I get to the museum, because it's not going to be permanently glued to the desk, but it will be permanently glued to the mat. I'm putting the ship right in the center of the mat. At least for me, my project usually sits in the center and all the chaos and mess starts to radiate out from it. I added a little roll of tape, a charm in the shape of a tool, and then I kept some of the shavings from the wood to glue on. It kind of helps give that realism that the captain was carving away and just left the mess there. I also cut 2 extra pieces of toothpick to kind of look like dowels that the captain is waiting to use. And then I realized the mat was just looking way too clean, so I took a little bit of that glue paint color that I used, put it with some water, and started making little marks as if there had been drips. I also made this tiny piece out of a decorative toothpick that I'm hoping will look like something the captain used to get glue out of the jar, and then of course made a bit more of a mess with it. I glued it down, so hopefully you'll kind of get the hint of what it is. At the same time, I had painted that craft knife I showed you before, a little silver on the blade and brown on the toothpick handle. I glued that near the shavings. At this point, the string had dried that earlier I had hoped to curl, and it did give quite a good curl, so I was happy with that. I think it's going to be much more interesting than a flat string just laying flat on the board. I added the small ruler charm to the top left corner, and then I decided to leave the hammer and the little jar of nails I'm going to create off of the mat so that it doesn't look like everything's just stuck to the mat. There's going to be 2 pieces that are on the desk. In a recent class I took, I also got a bunch of little tiny nails as like scrap pieces to put in a project, so this is going to be perfect. I'm adding them into this little round piece with a bunch of glue in the bottom so it takes hold of the individual nails. Off camera, I did add a few drops of watered down tacky glue on top of this nail pile, so hopefully it stays in place. Now that everything's done, I can add it to the desktop. It's so much easier to add because it's attached to the mat, and then I can add some of the other items that I know are going to be on the desk so that I can see how everything looks. I did decide to add some museum wax to the back of the mat because it wasn't sitting flat enough for my liking, and this helped a lot. So now that that's finished, I can put this desk into my project. So let's see how it looks. One of my favorite portions of this project, which has been since this started, was the fact that so many of you sent in books. Someone suggested along the way that I should create a map somewhere in the project that shows where all the books have come from. I have to say a big thank you to my mom. We'll call her Bentley House Mom. She went through all of the videos, wrote down all of the locations of where the books came from, the ones that I knew, and made a chart for me. So I'm going to give you a few highlights from that chart, so a few stats, I guess I should say. I gotta go get it. There were a total of 83 books received for the captain's bookshelf. 77 of them I had the locations, but there were 6 of them that for some reason the locations were unknown. So the country that sent in the most books was the United States, which makes the most sense because that's where I'm located, and it's a lot cheaper to send something within your own country. I just counted, and 25 different states, so half the amount of states that are in the United States, sent in books. And the state that sent in the most books, with 8 books total from that state, was New York. There were 12 other countries that books were sent in from, and the country that sent in the second most books was Canada, specifically British Columbia. I'll read the other countries to you so you know what they were. Austria, Canada, Chile, Denmark, Germany, New Zealand, Puerto Rico, Slovakia, Spain, Sweden, the Philippines, and Wales. And I think the award for furthest away goes to either the Philippines or New Zealand. Thank you so much to everyone who sent in books. It really is just a jewel collection that's centered inside of the captain's quarters, and it makes me so happy every time I look at it. So let's make the map. This is the world map that I chose for this project, and if you look close enough, you can see little red dots. I added those in Photoshop so I would know where to put the pins in the board, the fake pins. I did not realize as I was zoomed in on the computer how difficult it would be to see once it was printed off. I had to kind of squint and then pull up my computer reference so I could actually see where the pins go. I decided to add this to a piece of wood. This is going to be much easier to install, and I can also take it back out in case I've made any mistakes. And also if any books come in the future, because as you know, a mini project is never done, I of course would love to add them into the project if possible. I'm using these really tiny nail jewels to go on top of the areas where I put a red mark. They're very small, okay? I will say they're very small, but they're still a little bit larger than they need to be. And so there are a couple, at least in the United States, there are a couple pins that stand for a few different states. As you can see, there's not 25 pins on the map, and that's because they would not fit. So there is a pin on top of each red dot, but sometimes they cover 2 red dots just because this map is so small. So let's go ahead and put it into the project. I think the pins look great because you can see them in 3D from the side. It's going to go here against the wall, although I had to install it without the camera because I had to get my arms in there. And this is how it's looking installed above the bookcase. I absolutely love it. Along with the books, there were some other odds and ends that were sent in, and I'm still finding places for those. I do have some paintings that I picked up recently that I need to add, so let's just do a miniature adding montage inside of the 17th century captain's quarters portion. Since the beginning of this project, y'all have really been wanting a parrot. I have been sent a few parrots, and because this project is kind of about collections of ships, collections of books, I now have a collection of parrots, and I'm excited to add them into the project. Now, you might be saying, Aira, we don't have room for another pet. Centauri is the star. And I agree, but Holly reached out to me recently. She makes beautiful parrots. She sent me a photo of a Dr. Dolittle scene that she did that just blew me away. And upon seeing her parrot, I immediately got an idea. And this is adding more lore and story to the project, although I don't know if it will actually feature in the story, but if you watch this video, you will know. I'm going to be adding the macaw that's created by Holly, and it is going to be the captain's father's pet that was so loved that he had the parrot taxidermied after it passed away. Unfortunately, this is going to happen with pets because the captain's species lives for a very long time, and it's really hard to see those beloved pets go. So I am going to create a taxidermied vignette for the captain's father's favorite pet. That rhymed. And I'm also going to include the other parrots in other parts of the project. I can totally see the captain's father collecting them on his journeys as well, because it reminded him of his beloved pet. So let's get started. I will put Holly's contact information down below in the description box if you're interested in reaching out to her. She said that this macaw was modeled after Louie, a green-winged macaw that she handled when she worked at the Maryland Zoo in Baltimore. He's made with polymer clay, DMC floss, acrylic paints, and goose feathers. So incredibly beautiful, and the little wire feet can hold onto a perch. As you saw, she did make a perch for me separately. However, I'm going to need something a little bit smaller, so I'm going to save the perch for a future project. Many times, taxidermy comes with some kind of fake-looking plant life just to kind of set the scene, I guess. So I'm going to be using these fake plants and building a little pedestal for this bird to sit upon. I'm going to be naming this bird Pisces. I like that name because Pisces is a constellation, so it has to do with stars, plus Pisces is a water sign, which has to do with the water, which if you've been watching along, you know that has to do with our captain's story. I'm building the box out of some basswood and then checking along with the bird to make sure that everything is going to work. I carefully cut off a piece that I thought looked like a branch, and I'm going to insert it into a hole in the lid so that everything can be very stable. In order to make the foundation a little bit heavier so that Pisces wasn't toppling over, I filled most of the bottom with hot glue, which is going to be heavy, and then I glued the top shut. While the hot glue was still drying, I added in the fake branch and allowed that to dry in place. Then I could cut off the excess, and I ended up cutting off quite a bit, but I really did want Pisces to be the star of the show and not a giant curly branch. I added a few more leaves back. They had kind of got chopped off in the chopping process, and this is just going to help fill out the display a little bit. Then I could finish up my box. I'm using an emery board, and I always find that the ends get used way more often, so I started cutting off the ends, and then I feel like I have a brand new emery board to keep sanding with. Then I could paint everything with some brown. I probably could have done this before I added the branches, but it wasn't too hard to do. Now everything's dry and I can add in Pisces. I had to remove a few of the leaves just to make sure he had room. And I was so surprised at how well those little wire fingers held onto the branch. I just clamped them down and he stayed in place without moving. Holly did suggest a little museum wax just to ensure that he didn't fall off, and so I did that, and I think he's looking good. I laser cut a nameplate that's going to fit on the box, and I decided to write Pisces, beloved bird. I'm using a metallic rubbing wax to go over the top. This is going to keep my paper from warping by using a paint that has water in it, and then I could glue it on top of some black cardstock, let it dry, and now the letters are really able to be seen. I added back some details with gold paint and a toothpick, and then this nameplate was ready to go onto the box. Here is how it's looking so far. I'm pretty happy with it. I did realize that the name, even though it's like really tiny to me, it looks kind of large in the scene, so I aged it a little bit just so it isn't like the first thing you see when you get into the space. He's going to sit on top of these trunks, and as you can see, I had kind of an issue when I put my hand in there. I knocked over a bunch of things. The painting fell off on its own, so I'm going to have to fix that, and these two plates fell off that I had put on with museum wax, so they're going to need a different way to be attached to the wall. But before I get distracted by fixing all of that, let's look at the other three parrots. So this little parrot on the left was sent to me from Puerto Rico, and I just really love the paint job. It is incredibly beautiful. The one on the right was sent to me by a friend, and it was actually sent in a tube that said "stupid bird" because the foot had just broken before she packed it up and sent it to me. And the parrot in the center was needle felted by the daughter of the artist who created the captain. I just love his little expression and I want to include him, but unfortunately I cannot fit the entire cage into the scene. So what I'm going to try to do is carefully remove him from his perch, and then I'm going to needle felt the feet back onto his body. They were glued onto the perch separately. I ended up adding the two hard body birds, I guess that's what you would call them. One is made of wood and one is made of plastic. I added them to the bookshelf. Can you spot them both? And I'm going to add the fluffy, cuddly bird over to the captain's bed. I kind of like how he's peeking out from behind the pillows, kind of like the captain's secret that she has a stuffed animal on her bed, along with a sword and a robot. She has many interests, I think. I also wanted to add in these two items sent to me by She, and these two look so perfect for this room because of the browns and the golds. Now that Pisces was over here, I really wanted to make the area behind the spiral staircase much more interesting, and I love the clock peeking out with the hints of gold, or people are really going to look back there and be like, what is stored back there? And I have the little box at the base of the stairs, kind of looking like a well-kept secret. Maybe that's where the captain hides her most important notes. And as you can see, I fixed the painting and the wine. At this same time, I decided to spruce up the dressing room. This is how it was left looking, and recently I had purchased these goggles. They kind of look like steampunk goggles. These were made by Kathy Vowles. I purchased them at a recent show, and I wanted to add them in. So I went ahead and redid everything. I think this really highlights the beautiful case that was sent in by Fran, the hats that were sent in by Kat and Chelsea, and all the other miniatures that are in this room. And as you notice, I also added the little robot. I think he's going to be like a dressing robot to kind of help run the closets and make sure the captain is dressed appropriately for wherever they are landing. Of course, we can't forget Centauri. I have a couple of projects I need to finish up for him too. A while ago, I did a live stream where I made this mechanical litter box for Centauri, and the litter I did for it, it was just some sand, and it ended up not looking very good. So I'm going to redo it, and I'm going to be using gravel this time. I'm mixing it with some Mod Podge and paint. And I don't know why, but I thought adding brown and yellow would be a good idea. It turned out to be the worst color for kitty litter. So I neutralized the yellow with a bit of purple. Still not the most perfect color, but I think it's a bit better. And I'm going to be adding some glitter to it. I had a lot of people shouting glitter litter in the live stream, and so this is the moment to do it. If you're going to have litter in space, you might as well make it exciting. So I'm adding it in. It kind of got swallowed up by the paint, so after I added in the litter that's going to hopefully dry into chunks, I spread some glitter on top of it, and I'm going to allow that to dry before I put it back into the project. Speaking of Centauri, I did notice that y'all wanted me to spruce up this space a little bit more for him. So I have some cardboard boxes for him to jump in and out of, and I also added a couple toys up near his pillow. And while I'm in this area, I want to add one more thing. When Michaelina originally sent me the captain's doll, the captain had a jacket. She hasn't been wearing it for quite a long time because I just really loved the shirt underneath. I love the jacket too, but I like her wearing the shirt, and I'll show you why in a minute. But I've decided to put her coat on the back of the chair. I think that's a very lived-in detail that can be added. It didn't sit very naturally, so I'm adding some aluminum foil, and I covered the center with masking tape so you couldn't see the aluminum foil. This is going to allow me to push the arms down so that they're hanging with gravity, so it looks a little bit more natural. And I will show you why I like having just the captain's shirt. You can see me turning off the lights, but she does glow underneath her shirt, all sorts of different colors. I'm not sure it's quite coming off on camera, but she does glow, and I also really just like the design of the shirt. And because the jacket and the pants are made of the same material, you can definitely tell it's the captain's jacket on the chair. She also came with an eye pendant, which is important to her job, so I wanted to make sure it was close to her bed. I added a peg and then put in the eye amulet. This also glows under UV light, just like the captain. Finally, I need to do my last little bit of aging and add the shoe. If you didn't know, I like to sign my finished projects with a single shoe that has no match, and I put my initials on the sole. I have quite a large collection of shoes just for this purpose, so I always like to go through and figure out which one most appropriately fits with this project. And for this one, I'm going with a work boot. I think that's going to fit the captain the best. I'm going to do a little bit of an upgrade on this one. It's a metal miniature, and while oftentimes metal miniatures can be very detailed, they usually have just a very simple paint job. So I like to spice it up just a little bit, especially to make it unique, since it's going to be a shoe with no match. I don't want it resembling any other shoes. I'm signing the bottom with a gold AB for my name, and then it will be ready to go into my project. I'm actually not going to show you where I'm putting it, and that's because you're going to have to look for it in the next video, which will be the tour. It'll kind of be like an I Spy game to see who can find the shoe. Guess who finished all the things on her list? It's all crossed out except for write story down here. I'm in the editing phase. But now we can finish this chart. I'm going to reposition the camera for it. Hold on. As we all know, a miniature project is never truly finished because you can always think of new things to add in. But it is a good feeling when you know it's finished enough that other people can see it and not think, oh, shouldn't there be something there? So let's mark it off together. My marker's scraping off some of the other chalk. It's done! Be done already! All right, we got a big circle. It is done. Woohoo! That's all I have for you today in this final making things video. I really hope you like our new character, and I can't wait to tell you the story that unfolds between Bareth and Captain Maggie. The next video you see on this channel will be the story and the final tour video all wrapped into one. It may take me a couple weeks because I have to take this project to the Mini Time Machine Museum in Tucson, Arizona. What a very appropriate name for a place to display our captain's ship. I will also make a vlog of my trip out there and bringing the Addams family back home. Hold on. I gotta get my Halloween costume. I hope you all have a very happy Halloween. This is all I had time to come up with. They're like 3D printed parts that came off of the printer, and I was like, they look like the eyeballs in Beetlejuice. Stay safe out there, and I will see you in the next one. Bye. Bye. This is gonna happen to the captain. Okay. Because the captain's the captain's species. I'm Ava Bentley. Welcome to Bentley House News. Fancy.